It's 8:02. Time for The Moral Maze with Michael Buerk.
Good evening. Working on television makes it difficult, paradoxically, to see much of it. And it was only last Sunday that I noticed what everybody else already knew, that most programmes these days seem to be about sex. To be fair, Songs of Praise and the Antiques Roadshow ran their stately course without any noticeable canoodling in the choir stalls or copulating behind the commode. But the rest... There was one called The Lakes, where everybody seemed to be at it most of the time. In the hotel kitchens, which explains a lot about British food, though not why the custard's always lumpy. Even in a canoe while disposing of the murdered corpse of respectively one's wife and the other's sister. Short on romantic foreplay, this, but an impressive feat of balance nonetheless. By all accounts, Channel 4's new American import Sex and the City, which starts next week, makes The Lakes look like an early edition of Blue Peter. Interestingly, it's too much for mainstream television there, where it's restricted to a soft porn cable channel with hardly any viewers, so no change there then. Tomorrow, though, authority is putting its foot down. The Broadcasting Standards Council is expected to censure Channel 5 for gratuitous sex in other imported American dramas, and will attempt to introduce a ruling that explicit sex should only be shown if it's an integral part of a dramatic storyline, or essential to the factual context of a documentary. This isn't just about TV, but they're trying to draw a line in the sand, as one commentator said at the weekend, but the tide's coming in. Are we dealing here merely with changing tastes and fashions, or with something more dangerous, manipulative and damaging? Should we be worried that sex has been detached from procreation, marriage, even decency and discretion? Does it matter if it's now being used as erotic packaging to sell ugly cars or third-rate American dramas? Is it, in any of its forms, particularly pertinent in the week the Commons have again voted for the age of consent for homosexual males to be reduced to 16, a recreational human right? Is our culture being sexualised? Is sexual reductionism bad for us? If so, what should and can we do about it? Our Moral Maze, the 200th edition, incidentally, with our famous panel, the stalwart Janet Daley of The Telegraph, the constitutional historian and arch-libertarian, Dr. David Starkey, the medical ethicist from Oxford, the Christian perspective incarnate, Dr. David Cook, and Professor Ian Hargreaves, journalist of principle and the man who proves it's not an oxymoron. Janet.
I think I object more on aesthetic than moral grounds, actually. It's the puerile voyeurism that's so depressing. Like a child who discovers that he can get a lot of attention by using a four-letter word, and so he uses it again and again. Some of it is degrading. Most of it is crass. Done to saturation, it's extremely tedious. The genuinely erotic subtlety of sensual imagery is almost completely lost in favour of the explicit, the infantile, and the exhibitionistic.
David Starkey.
I was told not to begin by saying Janet said, but I'm going to because it is so interesting. Janet there reflects a point of view with which fundamentally I'm in sympathy. In other words, it's aristocratic, it's discriminating, it's aesthetic. But working for the Daily Telegraph, she's forgotten that we live in a mass democracy. She's always also forgotten, as you correctly said, Michael, that there is a tide, and there's no point in being Canute's courtiers. The tide has flowed in. It was spotted long ago by Aldous Huxley, who saw a world in which sex is simply a commodity, and that is what we've got, and there's no point in complaining about it.
David Cook.
Well, sex is actually a wonderful gift, and God made us to enjoy and to express our sexuality. Even at the heart of the Bible, one of the most erotic love songs in history, the Song of Solomon's there. But like all good things, it can be abused and lead to abuse. Surely we know we've gone too far. In the name of the gods of profit and self-indulgence, sex sells, and smut and porn and salacious detail fill all too many programs, magazines and films. We've lost a sense of decency, of good taste, of appropriateness and what's fitting. We've lost the mystery and emotion of sex. Now it's just an anatomical exercise. Sex happens in the context of relationship. It's part of a balanced diet. Now we're being force-fed.
Ian Hargreaves.
Well, sometime a decade or more ago, I was introduced to the mysteries of TV scheduling when I was responsible for a BBC programme called Panorama, and I asked my colleagues how we could get the ratings up, and they said, just make lots of programmes about prostitution and drug addiction and the ratings will soar. I looked at what our rivals were doing and found to my dismay they were right. But then I edited a paper for a boss who tediously was only interested in sex or sports cars on the masthead, but then he also thought foreign news was about dead black babies, and I know which of those attitudes I find more morally repulsive. Sex is a big part of life, big part of art. It's bound to be a big part of the media. A lot of it's bad, boring, or both, but it's not wicked.
Panel, thanks very much indeed. Our first witness is Peter Stringfellow, the eponymous nightclub owner, of course, and personification of man-about-town hedonism.
Thank you.
That's not bad, is it?
Yes, that's a pretty good introduction.
Is our restrained moral society going down the plug hole, do you think? And are you one of the people responsible?
Well, no, but I do enjoy sex. I think listening, we're throwing a big wide net over everything called sex. I agree. I hate vulgarity on TV. I hate vulgarity in newspapers. But sex I enjoy and like. And no, I'm a bit of a prude now that you're going to be surprised by this. I don't want to see explicit sex on TV either. But nevertheless, I have an
comes for free,
off button.
doesn't it? Yes.
Yeah, but I have an off button. You know, if I don't like it, I just move it and turn it on. If I don't like an article, I don't read it. If I've got a radio show and I'm not enjoying it, I'll turn to something else. I have a free choice, and I think that rather than censor to the extreme, I'd rather have the extreme the other way. I'd rather, you know...
It is essentially something, more and more, something for sale. And you're a part of it. I mean, your clubs sell sex in one variety or another.
Yes, I do. And, but it's, I like to call it the acceptable face of sex. You know, somebody said that before, something to do with politics. But
I think it was about the face.
So it's, but that's very pretty and very nice and very glamorous. It's nothing sleazy, nasty, and vulgar and horrible. Sex to me is a part of my life. I find it very enjoyable. Also, a lot of people are threatened by it. You know that. And you, my God, look at all the sexes going. I'm having none, therefore I must be all rotten and horrible, and therefore I hate everyone else. We mustn't be frightened of it.
Janet Daley.
But isn't it what most people object to, not the sex itself, because most people do enjoy it, but it's sex without emotion, that they're afraid that it's brutalising and exploitative?
Well, there's an awful lot of sex without emotion, you know. Every time you have sex with someone, deep emotions comes in, and you'd marry your first sex partner, and that doesn't happen. What does happen is, I agree with you, you know, yes, there is some brutalising, and we've all... I think Hollywood has a lot more to do with it than the English press or the English TV. There's a lot of stuff I don't like, and on the films I won't watch, you know.
But when I say emotion, I don't mean necessarily the love of your life. I mean emotion, tenderness, intimacy, privacy, respect, you know.
Okay, you can have that. You can have all that, and you can still have the hard sexual excitement of something that is very arousing and it's very sexual.
Yeah.
We can still have, you know, the love and the desire and the poetry of sex or emotions.
But you made the point earlier that if there's a program on television that you don't want to see, you can use the off button. That's the argument that's always used. Of course, we all do. That's the argument that's always used about broadcasting. But on the other hand, if you're living in a society where most people aren't bothering to turn off most of the time, you're living in a society that's becoming more cynical, more brutalized, more narcissistic, more egotistical, and you don't really have a choice to turn that off, do you?
I agree. There's, you know, I'm not going to defend all brutal sexuality. I'm here to say sex is a wonderful thing. We all have a choice. I'm very much against heavy censorship. We're all individuals. Well, I'm just finishing a book which is very fascinating about the first millennium, 1000 AD, when we were Anglo-Saxons as the Normans, and Christians were just coming in, but the Anglo-Saxons had a wonderful attitude to sex. It was all up front, and I'm reading it. It's hilarious. It's very funny. Then Christianity came in and threw it all underneath him. Don't let's talk about it. Don't let's have it. Everybody have it, but don't pretend you don't.
Can I just ask you one thing? Do you feel that anything that you've ever done as part of your livelihood, not your private life, has ever been brutal or exploitative?
No, not at all. I mean, if you knew, obviously, some of my press, you know, with radio, at least this is live, so what I say, you can. Nobody's going to edit me, which I appreciate, and thank you very much for the invite. And I prefer to have it live. But a lot of my press cuts out one or two lines and gives the impression I'm a sex-crazed maniac, which, well, really I'm not, you know. And I have not brutalised anything in my life.
The Moral Maze is a live show. David?
I'm just wondering whether you think that if somebody's not sexually active, there's something wrong with them.
No, I don't. I don't think that at all.
So people are allowed to make choices not to express their sexuality.
Oh, absolutely. And didn't I say that a little earlier? You know,
But
you're reading
confusing
material.
sexuality and genitality. I mean, there's a difference. People can be sexual beings without using their genitals.
Sensuality.
Genital it makes people laugh, that word. You've got to be careful. Genital. We start laughing at genital.
Well, nobody's laughed
there's
around
no
the table
word, is
because
there,
we're
for
taking it
the male
seriously.
organ that is not either. There's nothing very poetic about the word penis. We laugh at that one.
Do you think we need greater responsibility in the way that we handle sex in public
We
matters?
have an individual responsibility, and I agree with you. If you're going to put, you said a little earlier, did you not, about we want to bring rating, get sex into prostitutes. Well, we all know that. That does happen, and it will continue to happen.
So should we control it then?
Isn't it the truth? Are there prostitutes out there? I think there are.
Or do we just say that then anything and everything is permitted?
No, but I'd rather know about what's happening. And if someone wants to inform me in a documentary, genuine style, then I'd be prepared to watch and listen. If they want to put that as part of a play to get my attention, by the way, you're going to have sex in the middle of this, then they won't get my attention.
Ian Hargreaves, last question.
In the business that you're in, which is providing sexual excitement as part of an entertainment, a live entertainment, do you think that there should be freer conditions applied to that in Britain? I mean, you work under severe restrictions compared to other countries.
Yes, I do, and I'm quite happy with our restrictions. I wouldn't like to see them relaxed.
Why? For a moral reason?
Yes, morally, I wouldn't be involved if you could take my girls home and I could say to the girls, by the way, if you want, you can go and have sex with these guys. And then I wouldn't be in that business. And I know it sounds a bit mealy-mouthed, and you have to see it to understand it. It is a form of entertainment. The guys enjoy it. The women are not being exploited. There's nothing explicit. The G-strings stay on. No one can take home the girls. There's no sex involved in that respect.
Peter Stringfellow, thanks very much indeed.
Do I go now?
You do.
Oh, I like this. Can I stay?
Quick as that.
This
You
is
don't have
really
to take
good.
anybody home even.
Bye-bye, and thanks for the invite, folks.
Our next witness is Leo McKinstry, who's author of Turning of the Tide. Seems to be the metaphor of the evening. Sex has always been a preoccupation at all levels of society, hasn't it? And if you like, smutty jokes in the pub have now become explicit bouncing up and down on television or selling cars or soap pad, does it really matter?
Well, the great problem I feel, is that sex has permeated everything in our culture. In the 60s, we were promised a new era of liberation and freedom, and instead I feel that we've elevated a laddish, exploitative misogyny of the football terrace into the driving force of our society. You know, for instance, we have brown bread now being sold through sex. You know, the bakery saying that fancy a threesome, as if that has as if sex has anything to do with bread. We have Tony Blair saying that economic stability is sexy. We have Claudia Schiffer stripping off to sell cars. You know, it's absolutely absurd, and it matters because it degrades women. It leads to this exploitation, and it destroys love and commitment and respect. And we can see the consequences all around us in the breakdown of the family and in the vast soaring levels of teenage pregnancy. You know, we have the highest levels of divorce and the highest levels of teenage pregnancy in Europe.
Ian Hargreaves.
Let's agree that there's more of it about. How do you then account for the fact that the Broadcasting Standard Commission's research shows that there has been, in recent years, a steadily falling level of expressed public concern about the amount of sex on TV, just to take that as the example?
Well, I think, you know, the broadcasters have gone out of a limb over the last 30 years and have forced more and more degrading and exploitative imagery and irrelevant, you know, I mean, sex in absolutely everything on TV. And you know, I mean, what used to be taboo is now in the mainstream. So the result is the public's bound to accept it. I mean, what can the public do? You know, I mean, if
the public aren't bound to say they like it, to say that they approve of it more than they used to do.
The broadcasters have been pushing back the boundaries for years. You know, they've been seeing how far can we go, moving from full frontal nudity into more and more explicit imagery. And what was once banned has now become part of the accepted part of our culture.
But is it? Sorry.
So the public doesn't really have a choice, you know, and 30 years of this sort of stuff, people are bound to sort of accept it. A younger generation growing up with this, where there are no taboos anymore, no morality and no sense of responsibility, then, what alternative vision are they presented with?
But it seems to me that your argument, the style of argument that you use, is very much part of the problem of failing to see distinction between these things. I mean, I notice in a very angry article you penned for the Daily Mail, telling us that we should all switch off our televisions, that you lump together the following as being terrible things that we should deplore: a documentary on nudism, another one about sadomasochism, a programme Eurotrash, the fact that Radio 1 broadcasts from an Ibiza club where there have been live sex acts, Pride and Prejudice, God help us, the Full Monty, and the Hovis advert. Where are you trying to draw the line here? Which of these is more offensive to you?
Precisely the point that tacky, exploitative, sensationalist attitude comes through in that whole list. That broadcasts, take the example of the documentary about nudity, that was broadcasters thinking, we can actually titillate the public by presenting this on the air. They don't do this because they want a deep analysis of naturism in modern Britain. They do it because they think it'll titillate the public.
And David Starkey, if we could widen it beyond television, perhaps, to the wider sexualisation of society.
I'm curious about the deeply high moral tone that you're adopting. The last time we met, I recall you were defending President Clinton, but never mind. The question, obeying Michael as chairman as ever, the question that I was wanting to ask you was, you drew a very simple line between what goes on British television and the British media and this appalling sink of iniquity that we're in, and the fact we've very high levels of divorce and we've got very high levels of illegitimacy, which are indeed the highest in Europe.
Yeah.
But equally, of course, we have the toughest regulation of the media. You don't have a Broadcasting Standards Council in France or Germany or Holland, where they have lower rates of illegitimacy and lower rates of marital breakdown, don't they?
Well, I think it's precisely because of the attitude of broadcasters and precisely the way sex is presented on television and the very macho, misogynistic approach, the slightly laddish, the sort of loaded...
Forgive me, can I ask you to answer my question? My question...
I'm coming
move
to
there
it.
more rapidly.
And it's precisely because young people grow up with that sort of loaded attitude towards sex today, particularly young men, that there is this irresponsible attitude, and that's exactly why we have so much illegitimacy and so many teenage pregnancies, because sex is so divorced from relationships and love and any sort of sense of commitment.
Italian television is much more directly pornographic. You have stripping housewives and all the rest of it on mainstream channels. And yet, apparently, there isn't the family breakdown. Aren't you just participating in a general moral panic?
Well, I certainly do feel that it's justified to have a moral panic about what's happening in modern Britain in the 90s.
Shouldn't we first try to analyse it and first try to understand, whereas you're just Daily Mailising? And then let's shift. How do we go back to this idealised world, which presumably you feel we lost, headed by somebody called Lord Reith, wasn't it?
Well, I don't necessarily want to return to that sort of idealised world. But what I want to see is real freedom, and especially for women, real freedom and real liberation, and not this sort of laddish approach to sex that I think is so damaging and degrading towards women.
But sorry, the women are the leaders of this.
I think exactly that is true, that one of the tragedies of 90s Britain is that women have colluded with this degradation.
So they
of our
enjoy
culture.
it.
But one of the problems...
How patronising.
One of the problems, in fact, is even whether people accept or don't accept your diagnosis, what's the prescription? What's the alternative moral vision that you're going to put into place here?
Well, that's the great problem. I mean, it's easy to destroy a sense of morality and responsibility in a society, and it's much harder to reintegrate it. And without any sense of a Judeo-Christian moral code in our society, it's going to be very hard to see how we can do that.
Before I get to you, Janet, you're not laying the entire responsibility for the sexualisation of our culture television, are you?
No, not at all. I mean, in a way, it's a symptom of the destruction of morality in our society, that broadcasters now feel perfectly free to put out what they do now. But you know, I do think broadcasters have played a very damaging role in the destruction of
Janet, a
morality.
last question.
Yeah, the sort of golden age that you seem to be describing of British sort of discretion and prudery, if you like, was really Victorian. And before the Victorians, before that, this was regarded as a shamelessly ribald and immoral society. Regency England,
Yes.
Hogarth's England. Couldn't it be the case that we're really returning to form? The Victorian period up to about the 1950s was the blip.
Well, it's very fashionable to sneer at Victorian England. And
No,
there
I'm
were
not sneering.
No,
I'm just making a historical
It
point.
is nowadays. You know, people always say we mustn't return to Victorian
I'm not saying
values,
that.
but you know, I mean, there were great things about Victorian society, and you know, when was Britain at its strongest, and when was its
Yeah,
society
no,
at its most
what I'm
cohesive?
18th
century.
Yeah, what
far
I'm-
stronger than Victorian.
Thank you, David. Can you wrap that up, Janet?
Yeah, what I'm talking about is whether this is the natural spirit of Britain, that the Victorians had a peculiar kind of religious fervour and a peculiar kind of reforming zeal, and that may in fact have been the hiccup in British culture.
Possibly, but I think it's sad if we've slipped back to that and that we've totally abandoned any sense of what Victorian values that used to be so strong in Britain. And I
Perhaps,
think that is a
perhaps.
tragedy, and that's why we're in the moral quagmire we're in now.
Liam McKinstry, thanks very much indeed. Our next witness is Rowan Pelling, who's editor of the Erotic Review, which is described as the fastest growing magazine in Britain. Circulation's already bigger than the New Statesman. Well, take from that what you will. Rowan, are you leading, following, or just exploiting?
I think, in a sense, we're following. There's certainly a sense that we would not have been able to bring this magazine out 10 years ago, and it's been an accident. I was doing the magazine as a newsletter. It was going free to about 5,000 people, and suddenly there was this amazing response, people sending in letters saying, here's £10 towards the cost of this thing. You can't possibly do it for free. We really like it. But I do think that is a response to the fact that there hasn't been anything like that, that in fact, whilst all that has been always following on a real lads culture building up, we have lost a sense of love being absolutely joined at the hip with sex. And I think, if anything, that's what the magazine is about. It's about bringing the two back together again, which is what Eros is all about.
David Cook.
Well, I'm delighted to hear this. I wonder whether you can explain if there's a difference between sex selling a car and sex selling a magazine.
Well, yes, absolutely, because my magazine is called the Erotic Review. Now, if it didn't have sex in it, I think it would be a fair enough comment for people to send it back and ask for their money back.
But your sex is
And we're
used to sell.
Well, it would be in my case, because if you were selling anything that called itself the Erotic Review, it couldn't sell without sex. But it is sold very discreetly. It's in bookshops like Waterstones, or it's in advertisements, classified advertisements. People can choose to buy that.
Market papers, if I
In
remember
very,
correctly.
our biggest response is from the Telegraph and the Times.
But isn't it
Yes.
interesting?
This
if
does
you're
not
talking,
surprise me.
A panel.
if you're talking about a
Contain your
laddish
delight.
culture, then why on earth are the Telegraph readers mostly your contributors then?
Well, no, I think they're reacting away from it. I think people have been so glad that there is something out there which isn't using these words, which actually I ban from the magazine, words such as shag and bonk, which I think it's not even a sexual thing. It's slightly linguistic. It's a whole thing of manners, of the respect we have for things that's changed our attitudes towards sex.
But if you
It's
look at
not
the kinds
sex
of
per se.
titles of the articles that are written, do you think this is the normal way of expressing love between human beings in a relationship?
Oh, I think when you love someone, you exercise your imagination, and in every other sense of life, we talk about failures of the imagination. Now, in sex, if you talk about using the imagination, everyone suddenly gets very, very angry, as if this is perverse and awful, whereas in fact it can enrich your life and
Well,
actually
it
enrich.
can also do harm as well. It can lead to abuse. It can lead to corruption.
Well, it can,
not?
because you can have, obviously, people's imaginations can be in some way, distorted. But in fact, the force of imagination, I think, is one of the great gifts we're given. And I think if you harness it to the other great gift, and sexuality is one of the great things we're given, then you can build up towards perhaps the most special
The
experience
argument
of
we've
your
had
life.
thus far is that sexualisation is leading to moral decay. If
Yeah,
you
I-
want to say no to that, where is it leading us then?
I think sexualisation this is just the usual ebb and flow of the tide. The 18th century, as Dr. Starkey pointed out, was a great first sexual revolution, and then we bounded back to the Victorians. And a point I'd like to make in response to Liam McKinstry is, in fact, what you had in a very repressed Victorian society was some of the most terrible pornography that anyone has ever seen. I have never seen anything.
How much have you republished of it?
Funnily enough, with the sister company, the Erotic Print Society, I don't think we do anything Victorian because most of it is such terrible.
Can I move you away from the Erotic Review for a second and just say, well, if that is your point of view and that you deal with these matters in a sort of rather arch and literary way,
Yes.
and can't be blamed that it's about sex,
In the best
David.
possible taste, of course.
If she'd called it citron carburettors, I think you'd have had a point. What's your view of what's happening on television? Do you not? Do you not accept the point that a lot of it is manipulative? A lot of it is must be a television producer thinking, oh, God, the drama's going a bit slow here. Let's have a bit of bonking.
I think.
Oh, sorry, you don't use that word. Do you?
I don't use. No, I certainly don't. I think both the advertising industry and the television industry, that they're so competitive, they're so fighting for a market that everyone has turned to the easy solution. They think that sex will sell everything. Well, I think The Lakes is a very good example. I watched the first series. I thought it was a bit OTT, but I quite enjoyed it. This second one, I watched the first one. I thought absolutely not. Switched off. Didn't watch any more. And I think that will happen. I think the next lesson will be. That they will see every single program being the same and using sex in a very cheap, absolutely non-related way will mean that they'll just stop doing it.
We reach a point of satiation rather than fascination.
If not
Janet
absolute
Daley?
tedium. Yeah. Isn't there a big difference, in fact, between the written word and what is seen on a television screen, which involves real people apparently doing real things? The written word, it seems to me, one should have absolute freedom in what one publishes and what is bought in the written word, because it involves a kind of active imagination, and you know that you're using your imagination to envisage it. What happens on a television screen looks like a species of reality, and therefore it can manipulate people into believing that this is real life, and if you're not participating in it, you're being left out.
I don't know. No, I don't think people are actually so sheep-like as that. And I think it has always been a slight hypocrisy that we feel, well, that's fine. We can put anything into books or indeed into literary magazines because that's a very small section of the population who are going to see that and they won't.
No, I wasn't saying. No, I'm not talking about literature as opposed to non-literature.
It's an interesting point, Janet. But
all right.
Well, I just think most
one
viewers,
of your hobby horse up a blind alley, in my view.
I think most viewers of television actually are quite able to distinguish. Say, well, these are actors. It's only a tiny, tiny proportion who can't make that distinction.
But it's a much more passive medium than reading.
I think you've made a point,
yes,
Janet.
it is.
Ian?
What's troubling me about your argument is the way it's a rather sort of upper class kind of argument. There's a sort of tasteful end of this which uses longer words and which has headlines like the theology of blowjobs, which I was sorry you didn't discuss with David Cook. But aren't you really just saying that something that's in your manner, the manner that you and your readers prefer, which you're entitled to prefer, is good, whereas you don't like it when it's, beer swilling boys talking it their way?
I thought that was exactly the point I've just made, that I wasn't saying, because the whole point is I'm saying I think it is an excuse if we just say that my magazine can say things and that's right and good because it's literary and other mediums can't. I just think that you can actually do things well, and although I'm not a huge fan of lads mags, I think they're better than soft porn mags. And since the advent of FHM and Loaded, the sales of Penthouse and Forum have fallen off massively. Now, I think if people did, sex is a part of life, we can't deny this. It would be very odd if you showed dramas where you show people eating and sleeping and you didn't include sex in that. But if it was shown realistically and also incorporated more less, perhaps prostitutes, more loving relationships, Pride and Prejudice having kiss, I thought that was a fantastic thing. No one would object to that.
But if it's wrong to show people eating and drinking and not having sex, why not show them defecating as well? I mean, why does every natural function have to be exhibited or displayed?
I think if it's part of the story, it's fine. There are TV dramas that show people going to the loo now, and that's fine by me.
The point is that there can be a bit of scope for subtlety and illusion and wit and imagination, can't there? Everything doesn't have to be explicit.
No, it doesn't. It absolutely doesn't. And I agree, as we say, I don't know who's going to make this definition for when it's actually sort of integral to the plot, but I agree it's fine if it's integral to the plot. But I'd like to know who's going to decide that.
Isn't there a wider worry that I think David Cook hinted at, that the sort of preoccupation with sex, as if it is even more of a driving force and preoccupation in everybody's minds, leads to all sorts of, creates all sorts of tensions inside individuals and inside societies. Am I getting enough of it? Or,
yes.
it's...
Well, I agree with that, which is why
the problem.
Again, another thing I've always said,
that?
I'm not going to do any headlines that say 20 ways to have better sex. I think this is a terrific pressure, and I think there should be as many voices saying, look, it's absolutely fine and fantastic to have no sex at all, to have long periods of abstinence or whatever. No, I don't think we do give enough voice to that, and when we do, we present people as being completely bonkers. And I just think, why can't we allow for the fact that we understand that people have a sex life and that we allow this to be so, but at the same time, we're not going to attack people for showing imagination in this area.
So you might print an article that give it up for a year, perhaps.
Might improve it, yes.
All right.
Absence.
Rowan Pelling, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Last witness is Peter Stead, who's the cultural historian and author of film and the working class, and done biographies of Dennis Potter and Richard Burton. Peter Stead's on a line from Swansea. Peter, those who regard this extraordinary explosion in the use of explicit sex in all areas of our cultural life as a good thing, say that it's a refreshing change from the taboos and hypocrisies of the past. Is that a valid argument?
No, I don't think so. I think, first of all, we must stress, I think, that there has been a sexualization of our culture. There's no doubt at all about that. And as some of your people have been saying, initially we were promised that this was going to be about fulfillment, about liberalizing and releasing people. But we have to put this into the context. The context, of course, that the sexualization has been commercially led. It's been about consumerism from the start. It's been led by advertisers, been led by people who want to sell newspapers. And as we've heard stressed several times during the program, we're now caught up in a ratings battle. All the television channels in Britain are trying to go down this same road. Peter Stringfellow tried to say that people have the freedom of choice. The point is they don't have a choice. Now there is sex on almost every channel all the time. We must also, I think, put this into the context of a cultural battle. What we've seen, I think, in the last generation is the way in which the Marxist class war, having nowhere to go on the industrial front, transferred all its energies to culture, and particular pressure groups in society have captured culture, have achieved an elitist position, and have imposed, I think, their preoccupations and their standards on the rest of the nation.
I mean, that's obviously a point to pick up and run with, but better than hypocrisy?
Yeah, I think so, because although...
Oh, you mean hypocrisy is better, do you?
Sorry. Yes, well, elements of it, I think. There's nothing wrong with that. As Janet, I think, stressed, basically one's first reaction, this is sad and tedious, this reductionism, but it is dangerous, I think, because it does lead to the exclusion of certain other issues. I belong to a history department in a very good university in America, where people were classified in terms of whether they were feminist, gay, black or Jewish. Some people were all those things, and almost every day we fought all those battles. And it seems to me that all the beauty and variety of history went out the window. And this is now happening in institution after institution. It's happening in the Labour Party, it's happening in the Cabinet, it's happened in broadcasting, it's happened in the BBC, it's happened in the Church of England. When people come to write about the decline of the Church of England, I think they will put enormous emphasis on the way in which a very large percentage of its clergy became preoccupied by these sexual matters. We are reducing our culture to these single issues, and we're losing all the nuances. It was far better. Of course, people suffered in the 40s and 50s. There were gay people who were persecuted at work. There were women who had to go in search of abortion clinics and so on. And certainly things had to be liberated from that point of view. But what we've lost all the nuances of our culture. I think every culture has to have a little hypocrisy, has to have some double standards, and that's what maturity is, making up your own mind.
Let me hang on. Let me stop you there. You've given us so much to go at. I have to stop you mid waterfall there. David Starkey.
It's just the Welsh.
No, hang on. David Starkey. He's busting to get in.
No. On the contrary, I would
very
hate
relaxed
to interrupt that wonderful Hoyle, but I will do my best to. You kept using the word nuance, and you kept using the word hypocrisy. Janet Daley used them before, and they were also used in rather different contexts by Rowan Pelling. Nuance and hypocrisy are rather aristocratic and upper middle class things. They're elitist, aren't they?
No, what I'm condemning...
Aren't they?
No, not necessarily. They're not necessarily...
Give me examples of working class subtlety.
are the tremendous working class subtlety. I think there was far more tolerance and far more understanding in working class situations. People, I think, have tended to caricature working class sexuality. Families and individuals and groups of people worked things out for themselves. And this is what I'm saying. We have a culture where nothing is nuanced now, where everything is explicit. People work out the logic, they always go to the extreme.
Forgive me, I'm going to press you on this. You will remember the illustration of working class sexuality in Richard Hoggart. Do you recall that wonderful phrase that the miners didn't look at the mantelpiece when they were poking the fire? Now, I don't get much of a sense of subtlety there. Do you, Mr. Stead?
I thought my own experience of working class culture, and I grew up in a working class culture which was not very different from that described by Richard Hoggart, was that there was far more tolerance and far more understanding.
We're not talking about tolerance. We're talking about nuance. I'm really trying to get you to understand that the working classes can't even spell the word nuance.
Oh, come on, David.
David,
That's
I think you've gone a bit
unforgivable.
wrong.
This is elitism
That's
now.
unforgivable.
Right. Okay, then let's continue talking about elitism, shall we? Presumably you would have preferred the world that was represented by the BBC of the 40s, the 50s, the 20s and the 30s. What was that if not elitist? And hypocritical?
No, I'm not saying that it was also nuanced. I would certainly prefer the BBC of the 1950s, yes. Absolutely right. Where I think there was a far finer sense of balance.
But sorry, wasn't it elite? Forgive me. You were criticising the modern media for being run by self-regarding elites. Is there anything more self-regarding than the kind of elites who ran the BBC of the 20s and 30s, or more hypocritical?
No, what I would say is that in an industrial society, a modern industrial society, there should be a variety of elites. Because we have deindustrialized, television, the media and the arts have, if you like, captured the soft aspects of the culture. And that has allowed them to impose their views across a much greater area of life than was previously possible.
Ian Hargreaves.
Don't you think, Mr. Stead, that you're grossly overstating the scale of what has occurred? I mean, I don't know whether you've looked at your listings page of your paper today, but I don't think you'll find too much sex on your television at the moment. And you live in a part of the world, or where just to the west of it, it was reported in the newspapers this week that the Monty Python's Life of Brian has just been released for viewing in cinemas. I mean, it's hardly an undifferentiated world of which we speak.
What you must remember is that Monty Python was banned in Swansea, not because of its religious context, but because Welsh actors were cast as the Palestinians.
Typecasting, I believe it's called.
It is regarded as a gross insult on our people.
This was an illumination absent from the pages of the Western Mail, I'm sorry to say.
Even here, Welsh culture was more settled because films banned in Swansea were immediately put on Llanelli. So all the intellectuals of Swansea would travel to Llanelli. You've got to have this little bit of adventure in life. You have to go in search of these things instead of them having them thrust at you.
If you move away from the wonders of the Welsh world to a very important issue, I think, which you're raising, are you suggesting that we do need taboos, and what should these taboos be?
I think all societies need taboos. I think civilized society depends on them. I think you have to set out to protect certain people who are vulnerable. I think a point has been made in the last few days that as our culture has been sexualized, more and more groups have been affected by it. And I think we're at that point now where childhood and innocence is being directly attacked. There's no
Is it
doubt
only children, or are there others?
There, I think, all kinds of groups in society. I think that I think anyone who teaches in the university will see the way in which people mature sexually at a different rate, and they must be allowed to work these things out for themselves instead of having norms imposed on them.
But you're saying such contradictory things. On the one hand, you're talking about elites leading a sort of sexual revolution that nobody wants. But on the other hand, you're saying people have to be protected in this rather paternalistic way. And then on the other hand, you're saying people have to be able to make up their own mind. Children and adolescents and so on have to be able to find their own way and make up their own minds. You can't have this always up.
Yes, I think you can, in a sense, if you accept a society where there are different kinds of elites. Where there are a range of issues.
You mean good ones and bad ones?
No, I'm calling for a pluralistic society, and I would say the emphasis on sex in our culture in the last few years has led to a reductionism. As you yourself said, we moved away from a pluralistic society.
No, I didn't.
Peter Stead, that was great fun. Thanks very much indeed. Panel, I mean, let's dispose of it. Are we agreed that there has been a sexualisation of our culture, or is it just a matter of shifting taste? Actually, on this one evening when I did watch television, I watched an old black and white movie, and they were smoking all the time. Absolutely unforgivable now, of course. But bouncing up and down in the kitchen of this hotel's fine. It's not just a matter of changing taste, or do you think there is, David Starkey?
No, I think, in fact, there has been a revolution in the extent to which it's talked about, its omnipresence. I don't think that anybody can actually deny that.
But would you go as far as to say it's breaking, as Leo McKinstry was saying, it's breaking down families, it's
that's
contributing
silly.
to more teenage pregnancies?
I think David rather effectively demolished that one.
There's absolutely no evidence of a connection there, and indeed one of the programmes that's been heavily criticised on Channel 5 is deliberately the Sex and Shopping, that interesting linking of sex and commerce, is explicitly pointing out that all of the things that were being shown there are freely available in most European television channels. It is quite extraordinary. So I don't think you can make that simple point at all. I think that, again, too, none of our witnesses, not one of them, when they were pressed, McKinstry, Stead, came up with a serious suggestion as to how this cultural or moral counter-revolution could possibly be effected. I mean, what do they want? The old moral world was enforced by, the most terrible legalised and social oppression.
Aren't they? Wasn't, in fact, what each of them was doing simply to state their own preferences,
it was
their
an
own
aesthetic,
taste,
not a moral debate.
Exactly.
It was an aesthetic debate.
Their own vantage point in society, and to say, I'd like the world to be like the way I see it. Well, I'm sorry. The world isn't the way that any one person sees it, and that is something you just have to live with.
Yes, I mean, Stringfellow wants it all.
Sorry, hang on.
Hang on a second, Janet.
That's a cop-out. I made the aesthetic point myself, and I think it's terribly important, but there is a moral dimension to this. The
Never known you
revolution,
make a point that you didn't think was important.
No. The aesthetic argument is very important because it isn't it's not a trivial thing, but there is a moral case here. The sexual revolution, particularly as we all preached it in the 60s, was supposed to be about liberation, about personal liberation. And the tragic point is that it's become about pressuring people to conform and making them feel inadequate, particularly adolescents. And I think...
what does that do logically to their ability to form lasting relationships?
Absolutely. I don't think...
So it's more than aesthetic,
Yes,
you're
exactly.
saying.
That's exactly my point. It's a moral argument because it's cruel, it is exploitative, it is brutalizing, it is callous, and there are a great many young people who are made to feel more inadequate.
What was the previous world? Aren't you simply describing the imperfection of the human condition?
No.
Shouldn't you have the wit to see that?
Of course, the human condition is inevitably imperfect, but the point is that we're putting specific exploitative pressures on people at the most vulnerable period of their lives now.
David, the imperfection of the human condition is your line of country, isn't it?
Well, it is, but what's happened in the manipulative sexual technique and the way in which the commercial factors rule is, instead of having freedom, we've got enslavement. There is a moral issue, and that's we're reducing things to nothing but sexuality, and we're reducing sexuality to nothing but particular kinds of techniques and bodily functions, rather than seeing it in the context of relationships. And we need good models, and we need to see sex in a context. There's nothing wrong with sex, it's just it's not the only thing about human beings. And if in reality most people have sexual intercourse 2.4 times a week, if we're going to show real life on television, then it would be rarely rather than all the time.
The reductionism argument, Ian Hargreaves, does that carry weight, do you think? The idea that it is actually in some way blotting out an awful lot of subtlety of nuance, as our last witness said.
I don't think that it is reductionist in the sense that it is, the literal sense that it is reducing all other issues to being issues presented as being sexual. What is true is that there is more of it about than anybody actually wants to watch or consume, but the market is finding its own level, and Janet's argument against it could equally but well be made with any other function of the market. Everybody's under pressure to buy all sorts of things that they don't want to buy the whole time.
But it doesn't
in praise of markets, Janet, what's wrong with it in this instance?
It doesn't reflect, the markets in other consumer durables or whatever, doesn't reflect on people's personal desirables.
Have you never heard me keeping up with the Joneses?
me finish.
or the steads.
It doesn't
Do so in 10
reflect on
seconds,
one's
please.
personal desirableness, one's lovableness.
David Cook, in one word, something to worry about.
Yes, to worry, but the tide will turn, and we will get back to taste, decency, and good values and what's appropriate.
Oh, an uplifting note.
Lord
Ian.
Reith will be
Heavens
back.
be praised.
Oh,
Thank
Ian,
goodness
we will
for that.
welcome him with fanfares. That's
The
it for
Lord
this
be
week.
blessed.
From Thank you, David. From our panel, Janet Daley, David Cook, David Starkey, and Ian Hargreaves, and from me, until the same time next week, goodbye.
The Moral Maze is presented by Michael Buerk and produced by David Coomes. At 9 o'clock, our destination is the final frontier. Astronomers say that the universe began with a Big Bang, which hasn't stopped, is still going on, and may never stop. New evidence suggests the universe is expanding more rapidly than we thought. So where does that leave us in the cosmic pageant? Frontiers explores space, but not as we thought we knew it, in a quarter of an hour. This is BBC Radio 4, where now Jerry Anderson invites you once again to join him for a tale or two of life in Northern Ireland, in Jerry's Bar. This week's talk is called Foolishness and Formative Years.
The people of Northern Ireland have access to the best education system in the British Isles and use it skillfully to turn out maniacs and a disproportionate number of dazed zealots. One wonders, in these dying days of the second millennium, why so many well-qualified educators, many of whom are dedicated and driven, should produce so many little Catholic children who think of Protestants as margins, and little Protestant children who believe that a Catholic can be identified by gauging the distance between his genetically shifty eyes. Or why many grown Catholics feel they can single out a Protestant by the way he walks, and some Protestants think that Catholics have a distinctive odour. It would be laughable if it wasn't true. In a bid to do my bit to heal the sectarian divide, I once selfishly took it upon myself to take a strong fancy to a girl who was not of my particular religious persuasion. I was courting for Ireland. We got on fine, and I often found myself in close proximity to one or more of her relatives. I was once in her company when she was having a casual conversation with her granny, a harmless old dear with pince-nez glasses. Her granny was complaining about an unpleasant odour that had appeared in the vicinity of her backyard. She idly pondered on what the source of these offensive vapours could be. My girlfriend disinterestedly offered a few possible explanations, all of which were rejected out of hand. The granny struggled to describe the nature of the aroma. I have no idea what it is, she speculated, but it smells for all the world like a busload of wet Catholics. My female friend's face flushed with embarrassment, and I smiled benignly. It's an odd feeling to be lumped in with traditional barnyard smells. The old dragon meant no offence, of course, nor was any really taken. Humiliation comes with the territory, but it was odd. So how can this madness be eradicated? Sensible souls who know the situation on the ground shrug their shoulders and mutter about integrated education. We, in Northern Ireland, choose in the main to educate our children in such a way that they usually don't come into contact with people of another religion until they are well on their way to adulthood. By then, it's usually too late. There are a few brave integrated schools, but the going is tough. Even some otherwise sensible people do a passable impersonation of Pontius Pilate when the subject of integration rears its head. Even those who should know better, those on the coalface. I once attended a drinks party where one of the guests was a prominent Catholic bishop, an intellectual, a man widely respected and held in great esteem for his warmth and humanitarianism. I'd had a drink or two, and he hadn't. Catholic bishops don't usually get plastered at parties. I engaged him in conversation and we discussed the state of the nation. The nation at the time wasn't in a great state. Bombs were a daily occurrence and serious ethnic cleansing seemed on the cards.